All right, let's dive into one of music's biggest mysteries,
Yeah.
the life and death of Kurt Cobain,
Hmm.
the voice of a generation gone way too soon.
It's true.
We're going to try to unpack all of this today using the book Who Killed Kurt Cobain? The Mysterious Death of an Icon as our primary source.
This book is really fascinating. It delves into all these different theories about his passing,
Right.
even challenging the official ruling of suicide.
It's wild.
Yeah.
Right from the beginning, the book paints a picture of his childhood,
Yeah.
and it wasn't a happy one.
It wasn't.
His parents' divorce when he was 8
Mm.
seems to have been a real turning point.
Oh, absolutely. The author really highlights how deeply Kurt was affected by this.
Yeah.
He even say, and this is a direct quote, I just remember all of a sudden not being the same person, feeling like I wasn't worthy anymore.
Wow.
This feeling of unworthiness.
Yeah.
Almost like he was carrying the weight of his parents' failed marriage.
Right.
Became a major theme that we see throughout his songwriting. And you hear this in songs like Something in the Way.
And the book even mentions this chilling detail.
Yeah.
Graffiti on his childhood bedroom wall
Oh, yeah.
that read, I hate mom, I hate dad, dad hates mom, mom hates dad. It simply makes you want to feel so sad.
That's heartbreaking.
It's dark.
It really shows the impact that this split had on him.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, he also had a difficult time with his step-parents, which added another layer of complexity to his childhood.
Right, so music, it seems like music became his escape.
Yes.
The book talks about how much he loved bands like the Beatles
Yeah.
and how music kind of offered him this solace amidst all the chaos.
It's a classic story of finding a voice through art.
Hmm.
In Kurt's case, however, you see the pain and introspection deeply intertwined with his creativity.
Right.
It's almost as if music was the only way he could truly express himself.
Yeah, and it makes you think about how all of these childhood experiences really shaped that raw emotion that we hear
Yes.
in Nirvana's music.
Absolutely.
So those early years filled with instability and emotional turmoil, they really seem to have influenced the angst and vulnerability that became the hallmark of his music.
Yeah.
So let's shift gears a bit to his teenage years in Aberdeen.
Okay.
The book really paints this picture of rebellion, drugs, and a growing fascination with punk rock.
It was during these turbulent years in Aberdeen that Kurt sought solace and comfort in music.
Yeah.
Really drawn to the raw energy and rebellious spirit of punk rock.
And then there's that pivotal moment
Oh, yeah.
at that first punk rock concert, Black Flag in Seattle.
That Black Flag concert, that was a turning point.
Yeah.
It ignited this desire in him
Right.
to be a musician himself.
And that was it. He was all in.
Yeah, from that point on,
Forming bands, pouring his heart and soul into writing original music.
determined to make it in
Yeah.
the Seattle music scene.
And he faced his share of challenges
He did?
and rejection,
He did.
but his passion for music never wavered.
It never did.
And then Nirvana was born. The book charts their incredible journey, moving to Olympia, signing with Sub Pop,
Oh, yeah.
and then eventually landing this massive deal with Geffen Records.
And then Smells Like Teen Spirit dropped.
Oh, yeah.
Nevermind exploded, and Nirvana became a global phenomenon, a level of fame and recognition very few bands ever experience.
It was a whirlwind. I mean, the book describes Kurt's initial excitement.
He did. He even compared Nirvana to the Beatles.
Wow.
But then that intense scrutiny and pressure of fame quickly started to take their toll.
Yeah, he started to feel misunderstood and exploited.
Yeah.
The very industry that had embraced him.
You know, it's a common struggle for artists who achieve sudden and massive fame. Those expectations, the demands, the constant scrutiny, it can be overwhelming,
Totally.
especially for someone like Kurt, who was already grappling with his own inner demons.
And then enters Courtney Love
Right.
with her own complicated past, burning ambition to be a rock star.
Yeah.
And her bandhole was gaining traction at the time.
Their relationship, though, was intense and tumultuous, to say the least.
Right, but they did seem to bond over their shared experience with drugs and alienation.
They did.
But their connection was also marked by a conflict from the very beginning.
Yes.
And then the unplanned pregnancy
When the shotgun wedding in Hawaii,
definitely added fuel to the fire.
it did.
I mean, the media scrutiny was just relentless.
It was.
With that controversial Vanity Fair article
Right.
portraying Courtney in a really negative light. And then
Yeah.
they even faced a child welfare investigation.
They did. Their relationship, as passionate as it may have been,
Yeah,
definitely added another layer of complexity and pressure
for sure.
to Kurt's life.
So amidst all of this chaos, it seems like Kurt was battling chronic stomach pain,
Hmm.
and his drug use was spiraling.
Yeah. His relationship with Courtney also became increasingly strained. There were allegations of controlling behavior and verbal abuse.
Oh, wow.
The book really sheds light on the growing disconnect between Kurt's public persona and his private struggles.
Right, like two different people.
You had two different people.
So the Rome overdose
Yeah.
seems to have been a major turning point.
It was.
I mean, he was struggling with heroin addiction,
Right.
his relationship with Courtney at a breaking point.
At a breaking point.
And he just seemed desperate to escape the pressures of fame.
He was.
What's interesting is that the book offers some conflicting accounts of what actually happened in Rome.
Yeah.
Courtney claimed it was a suicide attempt,
Right.
but there are some murky details that leave a lot of room for speculation.
There are.
After Rome, Courtney and his friends, they staged an intervention.
They did.
It's clear that Kurt was in a very dark place.
Yeah, reading about his struggles, it's heartbreaking.
It is.
You really get this sense that he was deeply troubled, searching for some kind of peace that he could never find.
Yeah.
And it's and it really felt like he was at this crossroads, struggling to reconcile his inner turmoil with the immense pressure of his fame.
Right. And shortly after that intervention, he
Yeah.
disappears from rehab.
Yeah, he does.
The book details those days leading up to his disappearance, including that strange incident where he buys a shotgun
Oh, yeah?
with his friend Dylan Carlson.
That shotgun purchase is one of the key pieces of evidence
Right.
that fuels the mystery surrounding his death.
It raises a lot of unanswered questions.
It does.
Why would he buy a shotgun if he was planning to,
Exactly. And that's one of the inconsistencies that Tom Grant, the private investigator hired by Courtney,
right to find Kurt?
to find Kurt. He latched on to that.
Yeah, it's almost like he became less focused on finding Kurt and more on proving that something just wasn't right.
Yeah, he started digging into these inconsistencies. Like, how could Kurt inject himself with that massive dose of heroin and still be able to use a shotgun?
That's what I was thinking.
He consulted with medical experts who said it would have been nearly impossible.
Right, and then there's the whole thing with his credit card being used after his death.
Right. Who was making those purchases if he was already gone?
Right.
And Grant also questioned the suicide note, suggesting that parts of it just didn't sound like Kurt at all.
Didn't he have a handwriting analysis done?
He did. And the analysis suggested that the handwriting in the note was inconsistent, potentially indicating that someone else might have written parts of it.
So what was Grant's theory?
Well,
Why would anyone want to harm Kurt?
Grant believed that Courtney had a very strong motive.
Mm-hmm.
She stood to inherit a lot of money from Kurt's death, and she also seemed to have this strong desire to control his legacy,
Wow.
not to mention their very volatile relationship.
Right, so he was basically accusing Courtney of being involved in Kurt's death.
He even suggested that the Rome overdose might have been her first attempt to, let's say, get rid of Kurt.
That's intense.
It is. It sounds like he was building a case against her.
He was, but it's important to note that Grant's investigation had its critics.
It did.
Some people saw him as a conspiracy theorist who was stretching the truth to fit his narrative. But the book does mention that Grant wasn't the only one with doubts about the official suicide ruling.
There was a Seattle journalist named Duff Wilson who investigated the case for the Seattle Times.
Okay.
And he also uncovered inconsistencies in the police investigation.
Mm-hmm.
He even went on record saying that Cobain's death, quote, wasn't the open and shut suicide case Seattle police originally indicated, unquote.
So there were legitimate concerns about how the investigation was handled.
Definitely.
And then there's this other piece of the puzzle
Oh, yeah.
that adds another layer of complexity.
Tell me about it.
A Canadian chemist named Roger Lewis
Okay.
did his own research on similar cases where high levels of heroin were found in the victim's system.
Okay.
And he published this report called Dead Men Don't Pull Triggers, arguing that it's statistically improbable for someone to inject that much heroin and still be able to shoot themselves. So if it wasn't suicide, what happened?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
And the book doesn't provide any definitive answers. It just lays out the evidence, the inconsistencies, the theories,
Right.
but ultimately leaves it up to the reader to decide.
Right. It's almost like the author is saying, here are the facts, you be the judge.
Exactly. And it makes for a fascinating, albeit unsettling read.
Right.
It makes you realize how much we might not know about what really happened.
And to make things even more complicated, Kurt's own father-in-law, Hank Harrison, publicly supported Grant's theory.
He did. Harrison had a very contentious relationship with Courtney, even before Kurt's death.
Right.
He became convinced that she was involved in some way, and he even went on national television
Wow.
to call for a more thorough investigation.
So not only did the private investigator have doubts, but Kurt's own family did too.
They did.
I mean, it's easy to see how the public became suspicious.
Absolutely. It added so much fuel to the fire.
And then there's these other strange deaths
Oh, yeah.
that happened after Kurt's passing, like Kristen Pfaff, the bassist for Hole.
She died of a heroin overdose just a few months after Kurt, and while it was officially ruled an overdose, it did raise a lot of eyebrows. She'd apparently been trying to get clean and was planning to leave Seattle in the band.
So people thought her death might be connected to Kurt's.
Some people speculated that she might have known something about Kurt's death and that her overdose might have been a way to silence her.
Wow.
It's all very speculative, of course, but it adds to the intrigue.
It does. And then there was the case of El Duce, the frontman for that controversial band, The Mentors.
Oh, yeah.
He claimed that Courtney had offered him $50,000 to kill Kurt.
Wow, that's a serious accusation.
Did he have any proof?
He later backtracked on his statement, but he did pass a polygraph test regarding the alleged offer. Unfortunately, he died shortly after making those claims, struck by a train in what was ruled an accident.
Right.
Some people believe his death might be connected to his allegations about Courtney, but there's no evidence to support that.
It's also strange and mysterious. I mean, you have to admit, it's hard not to get drawn into the conspiracy theories.
It is, but even with all the speculation and unanswered questions, the book doesn't just focus on the investigation.
Right.
It also explores the impact of Kurt's death on his fans and the world.
It's hard to overstate his impact.
It is.
I mean, he became this icon.
He did.
For a generation, struggling with alienation and disillusionment.
He did. The reaction to his death was massive. There were tributes, memorials, and outpouring of grief from fans worldwide.
But there was also a darker side to it all.
There was.
The book talks about those copycat suicides.
Right.
Which are basically when people, especially young people who are already struggling, take their own lives after a celebrity they idolize dies by suicide.
Yeah, it's a tragic reminder of the influence that artists and musicians have and the responsibility that comes with that influence.
Right. The book even mentions that some people formed this church of Kurt Cobain.
Really?
Worshiping him as some kind of martyr.
It's a testament to how deeply his music resonated with people. For some, he became more than just a musician. He was a symbol, a voice for their pain.
And then there's Courtney's life. After Kurt, she continued her career with Hole.
She did.
But it seems like she also faced a lot of personal challenges.
She did. The book portrays her as a very complex and fascinating figure, both talented and self-destructive.
Right.
She battled with addiction, faced legal troubles, constantly dealt with media scrutiny.
It feels like she was trying to find her own path.
Yeah.
While also battling to control the narrative surrounding Kurt's legacy.
It's understandable. I mean, she lost her husband, the father of her child.
Right.
And she was suddenly thrust into the spotlight as both a grieving widow and a suspect in his death.
It couldn't have been easy.
It couldn't have been.
And their daughter, Frances Bean, grew up in the shadow of all of this.
It's hard to imagine what that must have been like for her growing up with that legacy, that mystery hanging over her family.
It's a reminder that even though Kurt Cobain is gone, his story continues to have this ripple effect, impacting the lives of those who knew him and the countless fans who connected with his music.
And the mystery surrounding his death continues to intrigue and fascinate.
It's like his story will never truly be over as long as those unanswered questions remain.
It's true, it really is.
I mean, where do we even land after all of this?
Right.
This deep dive into Kurt Cobain's life and death has been fascinating.
It has.
But it definitely leaves me with more questions than answers.
It's a complex story with so many layers. And I think the book does a good job of presenting the different perspectives.
Right.
And letting the reader draw their own conclusions.
Yeah, I feel like Kurt was this incredibly talented, sensitive soul who was just overwhelmed by everything.
Yeah.
The fame, the addiction, the pressures of the music industry, and maybe even a toxic relationship.
I think that's a really insightful observation.
Yeah.
The book portrays him as someone who deeply craved connection,
right,
but also pushed people away. He was full of these contradictions,
totally,
which makes his story all the more compelling.
Yeah, and it's like he had this love-hate relationship with fame.
Yeah.
On one hand, he wanted to share his music with the world,
Right.
connect with people who felt the same angst and alienation that he did.
Totally.
But on the other hand, the constant attention and scrutiny just seemed to suffocate him.
If we kind of zoom out a bit, it
Yeah.
raises these important questions
Yeah.
about the price of fame.
Right.
The way artists are often commodified
Mhm.
by the media and the music industry, it's a cautionary tale for sure.
It is. And then there's Courtney. I'm still trying to wrap my head around
Yeah.
her role in all of this.
Yeah.
I mean, she comes across as both a muse
Right.
and a destructive force in Kurt's life.
You know, the book doesn't shy away from her complexities. It
Mm.
acknowledges her talent and her own struggles,
Right.
but it also doesn't sugarcoat her more manipulative
Right.
and volatile tendencies.
It really makes you wonder if their relationship, despite the obvious passion, was ultimately doomed from the start.
Yeah.
Like two troubled souls trying to find solace in each other,
Yeah.
but maybe just ending up amplifying each other's pain.
Right, and it's impossible to know for sure what really went on between them
Yeah.
behind closed doors.
Right.
I mean, we're left piecing together a puzzle with missing pieces,
Yeah.
relying on accounts that are often conflicting or biased.
That's what makes this whole story so fascinating,
It is.
but also so frustrating.
It is.
We may never know the full truth about what happened to Kurt Cobain.
Right, and the mystery endures.
Hmm.
And that's part of what keeps people so captivated by his story.
Yeah.
But beyond the mystery, I think it's important to remember the impact
Right.
of his music
For sure.
and his legacy.
Absolutely. I mean, Kurt Cobain's death sparked these really important conversations
It-
about mental health, addiction, and the pressures of fame.
It did. It forced people to confront some uncomfortable truths about the fragility of life, especially for those struggling with inner turmoil.
And his music continues to resonate with people today.
It does.
Even decades later.
Yeah.
That raw emotion, that vulnerability, that sense of searching for something more, it really speaks to
Yeah.
a universal human experience.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it. And as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I want to leave you with this thought. Beyond the mystery,
Right.
beyond the speculation, beyond the tragedy,
Right.
Kurt Cobain left behind this body of work that continues to challenge,
Yeah.
inspire, and provoke.
Absolutely. His music is just this powerful reminder that even though life can be messy
Yeah.
and painful,
They can.
there's always beauty to be found in the struggle.
Absolutely. And maybe that's the most fitting legacy for an artist who defied conventions and never quite fit in.
Right.
He gave a voice to the outsiders, the misfits, the ones who felt lost and alone.
Right.
And that voice continues to echo through his music, reminding us that we're not alone in our pain.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the life and death of Kurt Cobain.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride.
It has. We encourage you to explore the source material and draw your own conclusions.
Absolutely.
And remember, if you or someone you know is struggling, please don't hesitate to reach out for help.
Right.
There are resources available, and you don't have to go through this alone.